So you spent time with Mamdani for this profile, but for your interview, this absolutely wasn't the first time you guys have met. Why don't you kind of fill in the listeners on your guys' relationship?
Sure. So I have a unique relationship to him that I've known him now since the end of 2017. So many years before he became famous, before he was elected to office. So once upon a time in my own interesting past, I ran for office myself, and it was for a New York State legislative seat, a state Senate seat. And I was young then and interested in pivoting for a time away from writing and journalism and trying something else with my life. And I hired a field director who then became my campaign manager. And this man who was then 26 was named Zohran Mamdani, and he had been working on a prior New York City council race that was in my neighborhood, and that campaign did very well. They didn't win, but they were an underdog campaign that overperformed. They were actually one of the very first DSA, Democratic Socialists in America, one of their very first campaigns after Trump won the first time. So there's a lot of energy around them. There's a lot of energy around the left in that moment. And I asked that campaign, like, who should I hire? Who do you recommend? And they gave me two names. One guy, I guess, lost history now. That didn't work out. And then the other one was Zoran. They said, this guy Zoran, like, he's really good. He's very good at organizing people. His job was really dealing with the volunteers and then the paid canvas as well, because you pay people to go knock on doors, and also you get volunteers to do it. So we spent, on my campaign, he was running my campaign. We spent, hundreds of hours together. He taught me how to canvas and knock on doors. We'd go down into subway stations and stand out in street corners. And, it was a big district that spanned a lot of Brooklyn. So we were all over the place. And I did not win, which actually I'm okay with. So I enjoy my life now. And then Zoran, after that, we stayed in touch. We remained friends, and he a few years later would win his first race for a state assembly seat, so in the New York State legislature, in like the lower house. That's the seat he still holds to this day, and of course now he is on track to be the next mayor of New York City. So certainly quite a turn of events. On one hand, I'm like anyone else, very surprised that he's so young and he's risen so quickly. On the other hand, having known him a long time, I was always struck by his talent, always struck by his work ethic, his charisma. I mean, he's really good with people. He kind of had that ineffable quality you see in great politicians. Even then, when he was younger, he had all of it. So on one hand, it's like, yes, now mayor, at this time, you can never predict those things. But
Mhm.
also, if you told me back then, there would be a time when Zohran Mamdani would get elected to something very important, I would have believed you. To me, he was marked for greatness.
And so, just to fill the listeners in, how would you characterize his platform in this election?
It's a really interesting platform because I don't think it's very radical. I think it's ambitious, and I think even certainly by the standards of European uh, you know center left parties, there's nothing out of the ordinary, I would say. So he's running on a few major planks,
Mhm.
many of which are actually quite achievable. One is freezing the rent on rent stabilized apartments. So New York City, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but there are a large number of apartments, not all, but a large number, that their rent increases are determined every year by something called the Rent Guidelines Board, which the mayor controls. Eric Adams has been pushing rent increases every year of his mayoralty. Zoran says he'll freeze them. Bill de Blasio, the former mayor, also froze rent. So again, not very dramatic, not very radical. Helpful to like working and middle class people live in these apartments. He's running on making buses free. So we, of course, pay for trains and buses in New York City, like everywhere else. He wants to make the buses free, which is ambitious. It's not been done, but there have been proposals in the past to do it, and it wouldn't cost an inordinate amount of money relative to the state budget, which is in the many billions of dollars. I think it would cost
Mhm.
less than $1 billion just to stop charging fare on buses. And also, it probably end up even speeding up the buses because a lot of people queue up, and it's a process. And some people just skip the fare anyway. He's running on a childcare expansion, free childcare from 5 months to 5 years. Very expensive, but the least controversial part of his plank. I mean, you talk to even like moderates and the business community and sort of the forces aligned
Mhm.
against him, and they are fine with the childcare expansion. It's just going to be in the billions of dollars per year. So the question is, where will the money come from? Zoran has called for increase on corporate taxes, which the business community doesn't like. Also, something you can't control. It's actually up to the state government to do that. Um, but the governor of New York, who just endorsed him finally, she has said she'd work with him on a child care program, maybe getting some state money for it. So starting a pilot. So again, not radical, popular. And finally, there's this other plan for city-run grocery stores, which I find, for whatever reason, arouses a great deal of passion, especially
Mm.
among his critics. Very strange to me because he's only called for 5 of them, and that's 1 per borough. If you know New York City, these boroughs are the size of cities, so saying you're gonna have a city-run grocery store in Brooklyn with cheap produce, it's a nice idea. It's not going to dramatically change the contours of all of Brooklyn because most people aren't gonna travel many miles to go there, and it's not going to put other competing grocers out of business, which is something you'll hear a lot. He wants to do this communist thing and undercut small business. It's like, well, no, he's proposed 5 of them. If he proposed 50 of them, it would be way more ambitious and more expensive, and maybe there'd be I would get the pushback from kind of the private grocers more. But again, the city cannot run 5 grocery stores. The city cannot run anything.
Mhm.
So that's the basics. There are other parts of his planks. That's the main agenda, and so it's actually um, quite popular. And if you actually break it down, it's not very controversial, and it's also a reason why he won because
Mm.
people who are not on the socialist left have been able to buy into it. So
Yeah.
that's what
I
he's
mean,
running on.
yeah, he won the primary in June, like, very, very
He
decisively, and I
did.
think probably the popularity of his platform has led to his critics to try and make hay from earlier statements he's said. I mean, I just want to go back to 2020, you know, at the height of what people call, the woke movement, when, Black Lives Matter was at its peaks. He repeated calls to slash the New York Police Department's budget. And I think he's come under a lot of criticism for that. Where is he now?
So he's not running on defund, like many Democrats, if not all of them at this
Mm.
point. He's retreated from that fully. He wants to have he's calling it like the Department of Community Safety to send unarmed sort of violence interrupters, kind of or social workers to help like with homeless people and these sort of situations where police with guns really honestly can escalate the situation. But that's not a defund. That would be either like a reallocation or even maybe an increase in funding, all things told. He's fully walked away from defund. He says he'll apologize for calling the NYPD a racist, anti-queer institution, which he did on Twitter in 2020. I mean, to be fair, the NYPD has a history of being racist and also being anti-gay. Though I'd say less so today than it once was. But he's walked away from those comments. So Zoran definitely in kind of the woke context is no longer a woke candidate. He's not running on sort of like a social justice ideology. Now he believes he's very progressive. He believes in racial equality and uplifting marginalized groups. But a lot of the rhetoric of 2020, 2021 is really not in his campaign at all. And of course, his critics have brought it back. I mean, Andrew Cuomo, who's still running now as independent, brings up almost every day, this is what Zoran said. Don't believe him. He's lying to you. The DSA itself has a lot of planks that Zoran has not always embraced. So the DSA is like very pro defund, and they want to, fully decriminalize, prostitution, sex work. Zoran used to support that as well. He's kind of walked away from that too. He has said repeatedly, I'm running on the things like on my website in my campaign and to sort of tune out the rest. Now, I think it's fair to point out the things that he used to embrace. I'm not one of these people who says, forget the past. I mean, the past
Hmm.
matters. But the reality is, for those who think he's going to come in and just gut the police department, it's not going to happen. Like, you can say he wanted to do it, but he's not just going to come in and burn it down.
Yeah, you mentioned the grocery stores before, and that was getting a lot of pushback from the pro business crowd. And in your piece, you write that the business elite of New York, they particularly revile him. What, apart from grocery stores, what policies would he implement that would have any kind
It's
of impact on them?
on the policy side, the most triggering thing is something he can't actually do himself, which is the tax increase. He's called for
Mm.
increasing taxes, the corporate tax rate in New York City. And the governor just said she's not going to do it. And she's more of a moderate, certainly on, and much closer to like the business and real estate communities than Zohran. So the tax hike has angered them, but I do think it transcends that. I think there is something cultural. I think there's
Mm.
something almost sociological about it, because this is a community, sort of when you think of like New York City, like a lot of major world cities, the finance and real estate have really in one way or another determined the course of events for many decades. Certainly since New York City in the 1970s nearly went bankrupt. And since then, this sort of like, soft neoliberal order has reigned as it has in London and elsewhere. So these forces, it's not that they always win, but they usually win.
Mhm.
And usually they spend a lot of money on things, they get the outcomes they're used to. I think it's very disorienting for them right now. They still haven't quite coped with it, that they unleashed almost $30 million against Zohran in particular. Andrew Cuomo had the super PAC, this outside PAC that couldn't coordinate with him, but effectively kind of was, well, you're not allowed to. That was just spending anti-Zohran ads everywhere. If you were in New York City in June, turn on the television, nothing but like some pro Cuomo but anti Zohran. Mail in your mailbox. I was getting deluged. My mother, who's votes in Democratic primaries in her 70s, getting like 3 or 4 of them a day. Digital, radio, everything. So they did everything that the playbook would tell you to do to stop the Muslim socialist who's 33 and running on a campaign to upend the system. A
Mhm.
true outsider's campaign in every sense of the word. Like Corbyn or someone like that. Except Corbyn won a leadership race, in the Labor Party, and Zohran's running this very broad. Over 1 million people voted in this Democratic primaries. It's a really big election. New York City, obviously a huge city. So they did everything they were supposed to do to stop him. Michael Bloomberg, the former 3-term mayor of New York City, he's one of the richest men in the world, worth many billions of dollars. He disliked Zohran quite a bit. A lot of it over Israel politics, which we can get into. That also was very triggering for a lot of the business real estate world, the finance world, very pro-Israel. Zohran obviously very pro-Palestine. So you take all this together, someone like Michael Bloomberg giving $8 million to a Cuomo super PAC, a lot of money, and being its biggest funder, they spend all this money. They unleash every negative ad imaginable. They attack him on defunding the police, on being a radical. They're bringing up his past as like a pro-Palestine organizer. He brought in this speaker when he was in college. He was this type of radical. Everything. The entire playbook was empty. The whole arsenal was empty. They fired every bullet.
Mhm.
And they lost. And they lost bad. And it wasn't that close. That's the
Mhm.
thing. Even I thought Zoran could win, but I was like, okay, it's going to be within 1 percentage point, 2 percentage points. They're going to be kept, maybe go to a recount. It's going to be very contested. And then there's going to be a general election, which will also be very contested because he just eked it out. That's what I imagined would happen. I think that's what Zoran imagined as well. Instead, he
Mhm.
wins by 13 points. He blows Cuomo out. And this business real estate elite, this Wall Street finance, the Fire City, um they have never lost like this before in such a stark way. And it doesn't mean they're going to make any less money under Zoran. It doesn't mean that he's an actual communist or socialist is going to seize the means of production and act do the things that people say you know socialists want to do. He can't do those things. It's still a capitalist society. He cannot wave a wand and change it. But the fact that they were defeated in such a stark manner, I think, is quite disorienting to them. A group broadly that just is not used to losing. The left loses money. The left has learned to lose. They don't lose, and they're still figuring out how and why. I think they're still working through it.
I want to bring back to something you mentioned about pro-Palestine. I mean, accusations of anti-Semitism have for so long stymied politicians on the left, and yet Zohran, who is just openly pro-Palestine, he's been very open with his criticism of Israel's war in Gaza, and he has a lot of support among Jewish New Yorkers. I mean, New York is the biggest Jewish city in America. How do you think he's managed to kind of deflect that criticism?
So it's really fascinating because certainly in America, I'm sure this is true elsewhere too. Even a few years ago, you take it back to 2020, certainly the 2010s, when it came to Israel Palestine, so much was verboten. There were so many places you could not go if you wanted a political career in the United States of America and in New York. I remember when there were rocket bombardments into Gaza in 2014, every New York Democrat rushed out to defend Israel. They'd have rallies. The progressives would come out, the moderates. It didn't matter your spectrum. There was no such thing as like a pro-Palestine voice in American politics. Like it did not exist. It wasn't even marginalized. It just like was not there. And to even bring it up was akin to really crossing a line you're not supposed to cross. It was truly taboo. This shifts radically. The last few years, this has shifted quite dramatically. Of course, much of it having to do with the current war in Gaza. I do think that's been a real generational fault line. Having read a lot about the 60s in Vietnam, I think it's a miniature version of that, where you have a foreign conflict that has really energized the West, and it has divided generations. Older Jews and older voters in general have a more sympathetic view of Israel, some because it's just the politics they're used to, some because they remember labor Zionism, and in their head, there's still kind of a left wing in Israel, though that left wing is very dead. You know, and then at the same time, you've got just a real shift in opinion, even among ordinary Democrats, on how Israel is viewed, how the Palestinians are viewed. You see in polling now, it's quite it's quite remarkable how fast the shift has come just in the last year or two. So in many ways, Zohran has been he's long ahead of the curve, but now the electorate is catching up to him. And so when he was starting running last year, the major question was, could he cross over from kind of his base of like young progressives and really build a broader coalition? And there was a feeling, Jewish voters would not support him. Now, New York City Jewish voters are very complex. You have Jews like me who are quite secular. We're a big part of that Jewish vote, and that is very pro-Zohran. If you are Jew on the left, you are very angry and upset by what's happening in Gaza, and you will support Zohran. Now you have Orthodox and Hasidic Jews who are very anti-Zohran. And these are ultra-religious, very pro-Israel Jews. Now, they don't support Zohran. They're anti-Zohran. But while they are a growing part of the New York City electorate. There are certain neighborhoods in New York that are completely Orthodox Jewish. They still can't swing an election. They do get a lot of attention because some of them do block vote, and they're very politically connected. But there are not enough of them to kind of, I would say, push out the traditional secular Jew who feels like culturally Jewish, who like me is bar mitzvahed, but feels no affinity for Israel. I mean that's it, especially among younger Jews who are not extremely religious. You look at Israel today and you see a right-wing ethno-state. And it just the politics don't line up anymore. And that's what's happening in the Democratic Party broadly. it's not going to be an Israel hawk party in the future. It just will not be, because there's no organic demand for it among rank and file left of center voters. They look at Netanyahu, they see Trump, but smarter and more cutthroat, truthfully, and that Netanyahu's willing to kill many thousands of people to stay in power. And they see a country, again, run by a ethno-nationalist, raunchist, like right-wing government. So again, I think Zohran, while he seemed, I think, to political commentators out of the mainstream, in fact, he's now quite in the mainstream. And a lot of the views he holds, whether it's support of BDS or just criticism of Israel, he says he'll arrest Netanyahu. He sets foot in New York City. This is not radical anymore. The left of center New York voter is like, yeah, I mean, why shouldn't Netanyahu get arrested? He's responsible for 60,000 odd deaths, many of them
Mm-hmm.
civilians.
So the election is November. What is the state of play at the moment? Cuomo is running still as an independent. Where are we at with the polls?
It's a very weird general election, one of the weirdest I can remember. But one, Zohran is on track to win. So you have Zohran as the Democratic nominee, which in New York counts for a lot. It is a Democratic city. There are pockets of Trump support. Trump got about 30% of the vote last year. There's one borough in particular that's very pro-Trump and very Republican that will not vote for him, but the other four will. So you've got Zohran, you've got the Republican candidate, this character named Curtis Sliwa, who's the founder of this vigilante group that non-violent, well, not non-violent, they don't carry weapons, and they wear these red berets and they kind of run around the city and hang out in subway platforms. Very, very New York, very odd. He's kind of like a character out of Central Casting, like almost like a Bonfire of the Vanities character. Very much part of like an old Trump New York, like 80s New York. So Curtis Sliwa, he's running. He's not going to win, but he's going to get his like 20-something% of that's like the Republican vote. You've got Cuomo as independent. So Cuomo's been polling in second, usually around 25%. Zohran's been polling at about like high 40s, mid to high 40s. And then there's Eric Adams, the current mayor, who's indicted on corruption charges last year, was sprung free by Trump. Trump won the election, took over the Justice Department, as presidents do, and got him off. Very, very corrupt. It was the sort of thing that saved Eric Adams from going to prison, did not save his political career. New Yorkers don't like Trump. They're sick of Trump again. So Eric Adams, being Trump affiliated, being corrupt, his poll numbers are in the basement. He's also running as an independent. He skipped the Democratic primary knowing he'd lose. So it's two independents, a Republican and Zohran. So right now the votes are getting carved up. Zohran's in the mid to high 40s. I do think for Zohran, it's going to be very important to break 50%. You don't want to go into City Hall where a majority of voters chose a different candidate. For him, I do think it's very important in these final weeks to push that number up, to get over 50, to say to New York, listen, the majority of New Yorkers backed me for mayor. Otherwise, I think the narrative would be foolhardy in that, win's a win. You will hear that. You'll hear kind of the anti-Zohran forces, of which, are still quite vocal and quite large, saying he's illegitimate in some way. He didn't win the majority. So that's where it is now. And he's in a much stronger position. He's got a lot of money. Institutional Democrats are beginning to support him. The governor just finally backed him. Chuck Schumer has not backed him yet, the Senate Minority Leader, nor has Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, who are both from Brooklyn. But a lot of labor unions are supporting him, and he's going to have a lot of money they didn't have in the primary, especially from like outside forces. So he should win by a strong margin. He also, I think if he runs a very good race down the stretch, he should be able to cut into Cuomo's base of support, because Cuomo is getting backing from people who vote Democrat, and now Zohran is the Democratic nominee. So my sense is if he is aggressive enough, he can pull from Cuomo's support, push himself above 50. But in general, in this very weird race, I mean, he's, I'd say 80 to 90% chance he's going to be elected mayor, maybe more. But it's going to be all about, honestly, the margins. People are going to look for that. If his margin is low, there'll be a feeling he doesn't have a true mandate. If it's high enough, I think it'll give him a lot of momentum heading into governing the city.
I want to kind of broaden out and talk more about the national scene in the US and what factors have kind of contributed to this rise of Zohrans in US politics. I mean, New York mayor is always a huge figure within the US. I mean, you write that it's the most difficult political position in America after the president. But what kind of dynamics within the left and within the Democrats have kind of allowed so much excitement to coalesce around Zohran?
Like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, he descends from the Bernie wing, the Bernie tree. He comes out of there. He was a volunteer, I think, in 2016. He was a major supporter of Bernie in 2020. So, this kind of left revival that really started with the first Bernie Sanders campaign in 2015 has had this long tail where a lot of politicians have been elected who supported his agenda or were backed by him in some way. So it starts there, I would say. You've had this, for a decade now, this kind of progressive left. You could call it like a soft socialist left, and that, socialism can mean a lot of different things in America. The word no longer carries the stigma it used to. I mean, certainly among conservative people it does, but broadly speaking, young people now in their 20s and 30s and 40s, have very, limited memories of the Cold War and the Soviet Union. So naturally, that has fallen away. The Zohran belongs to DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, which is really, I would say, the largest organ by far for the, socialist and progressive left. If you're talking about like a volunteer run organization where they have, 60, 70,000 members nationwide, they have chapters in a lot of cities. The New York City chapter is especially prominent. I think they've got close to 10,000 members now, especially with Zohran's campaign. So Zohran is very much was a rank and file member of DSA. He's still a member. I wouldn't call him rank and file anymore. He's very prominent, but he's been a member a long time. I think since like 2017, 2018, he joined DSA. He's been very committed to organizing socialists in the New York State legislature. So there's a number of members of DSA who are in New York State government, and he's been very much a part of like pushing them, trying to build power there. It's important also to put this in the context of American politics. America is a duopoly. There are no third parties of any real note. Third parties that can be of influence, like in the UK, where obviously third parties can matter a great deal. We have no parliament. So DSA, they are Democrats. Like Zohran is running as a Democrat. DSA backs Democrats. They don't run candidates on their own ballot line. So it's important to point that out. The old Socialist Party of the early 20th century did. And there was a time when you saw socialist candidates elected on their own ballot line, going to Congress, becoming the mayor of Milwaukee. That faded out in part because the American system was so hostile to it. It was very hard to exist as a third party when the Republican and Democratic parties would gang up on you, and also in a very zero-sum system where either you're winning the seat or losing the seat, first past the post. Very, very hard to build third-party power. So DSA has this alternative theory of power, goes back to the 1980s with Michael Harrington, who's a very prominent socialist who founded them, and he believed in backing Democrats and kind of dragging the Democratic Party to the left. That was his vision. And that vision has really continued in the current DSA. If the current DSA in many ways is to the left of Harrington, who is fairly pro-Israel, and sort of more reformist than some in DSA. So he's a prominent member of this group, now the most prominent one by far. They are growing. Now they aren't big enough to take over the Democratic Party. There aren't enough of them around America. But, this is a huge coup for them to have a mayor. I don't think DSA, which take it back to like 2017, 2018, was very, very new in the sense that it hadn't really done much politically since the 80s, was growing anew in the Trump era and also after Bernie's campaign, to go from there where, they were something like a quasi-debating society slash small band of organizers to now
Hmm.
electing a mayor of the biggest city in America by far. I mean, this is a huge leap, a massive leap. And Zohran is the highest profile leftist outside of Bernie Sanders. And unlike Bernie, he won. Now, Bernie won large states in his primaries, but he couldn't win the primary. And he was the mayor at one time. He's the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, which is the size of a few New York City neighborhoods.
Hmm.
The scale of this is so much greater. And that's what's fascinating about this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she won a single congressional district in New York City, beating one Democrat. Big deal. Changed the course of American politics in many ways. But you're talking a race where, maybe 40,000 people voted, something like that. I have to look it up, to now over a million. So
Hmm.
Zoran is a leftist running on the scale of like major American states in essence and winning dramatically. In a way, even Bernie like won California, but it was like a split field. He was very successful, but this is a different level. So for the American left, they've never had something like this before. So all eyes on him, on all across the political spectrum. But certainly
Hmm.
for the left, a lot is at stake right now. If he
Yeah.
performs well, if he doesn't perform well.
And I mean, it's also worth pointing out that this is a huge shot in the arm for the Democrats, who I have kind of seemed to lose their way since 2024. I mean, in your profile with Zohran Mamdani, he deems that the Democrats' loss in 2024 was not because that they were too focused on identity issues, but because they left the working class behind. Now, you mentioned that, Schumer, Jeffries haven't endorsed him, that, some of the real establishment Democrats have really seemed to kind of be dragging their feet in coalescing behind him. Do you think if he wins, it will end up kind of moving the party in that direction, and he'll just kind of gain more
It's
momentum?
it's possible. I mean, Zoran's really interesting because there's it feels like there's two kind of types of Democrat when it comes to approaching him. There's some who think he's really alienating, really radical. They won't touch him, and that's like a Chuck Schumer. There's some moderate Democrats in the suburbs of New York City who say things like Zoran is not the Democratic Party. We don't associate with him. Then you've got other Democrats also kind of in tough, you call them like swing districts, places where there are a lot of Republicans and they've won elections. They look at Zoran and they like what they see. There's a congressman north of the city in a northern suburb who just endorsed Zoran. And, he's in a district where a lot of Republicans vote. He's like, yeah, this guy is the nominee and we got to support him. And you see it, I think you see in other parts of America too. There's an intrigue among a certain type of Democrat, usually younger, um, who is thinking about how to appeal to working class people. And so obviously New York City is not America. It's a Democratic city, it's a Democratic primary. But what Zoran did is he built this rather broad coalition, appealing to voters who wouldn't self-identify as progressive or leftist, but were drawn to his agenda. So this idea of how does the Democratic Party win again? In 2024, they were getting hammered on affordability. Joe Biden had no real answer for inflation. No, like either policy answer, but also no message. There's no message.
Mhm.
The Trump message was very compelling. So they were just flat-footed on the affordability question throughout all of last year. And here comes a candidate again, love him or hate him, he runs on affordability. He runs on making life cheaper in some way for working class New Yorkers. Is he going to fix it all? No, I don't think he promises to. But he's saying, here are ways I can make your life a little less expensive. A free bus, free childcare. Oh, your rent's not going to go up this year. Again, not going to usher in the socialist utopia, but your life's going to get a bit easier when I'm mayor. And that was compelling. And so there is a type of Democrat who looks at him now and goes, this guy is charismatic. He is compelling. He's got people excited about him, which is very hard to do as a politician. He's one of the only politicians I can think of outside of Trump and Bernie and maybe AOC who can draw a crowd, like bring in
Mhm.
just thousands of people organically. So I think the smart sort of centrist Democrats, the smart moderates are looking at him and they're intrigued. They talk to
Mhm.
him. They watch him. Some offer support publicly. Some offer it more privately. Um, they engage. Now, Others, I think, are just behind. Now, maybe Schumer and Jeffries will endorse him before November. I mean, they should. It's silly. Either way, Republicans will attack Democrats as being the party of Zohran. They did it for AOC. They did it for Nancy Pelosi for decades. So nothing new there. Whether you support the guy or not, they're going to attack you. So I think the smarter Democrats get that, and they're backing Zohran. And they want to learn from him. Because again, yes, it's not like you can take every lesson and extrapolate to all of America, but you can learn something from it. I mean, you look at random Senate and congressional races and you try to draw lessons. So why not draw a lesson from a very broad electorate? One that is very diverse, one that is even in a Democratic primary politically diverse. Democrats
Mhm.
who, you know, Asian Democrats and Hispanic Democrats who are kind of up for grabs, who vote Republican, who vote Democrat, and Zoran was able to kind of pull them in. So I expect more Democrats to come around to him, especially as he becomes mayor, especially as he is a foil for Trump. I mean, Trump is going to be obsessed with him. That's already the
Mhm.
case. I think you have to expect that. He's going to want to make Zoran's life very difficult. So, I think the Democratic Party, what is the answer for their future? I mean, who knows? It's a complicated question, but I think you look at people who are successful, you look at people who have messages, you look at candidates who excite people, right? I mean, that it's a problem in the UK with the Labour Party. The Labour Party is not exciting the average voter. It seems like Reform is doing it instead. So it's
Mm.
the same thing, I think, in all politics. Like, who is getting the average voter excited to vote for an agenda? That was Trump last year. Trump had a succinct message. You could hate the message or love the message, but it was a message that cut through. Kamala Harris did not. She was a muddle, and Trump won the election. I think now Zoran comes with a sharp message, and Democrats certainly are paying attention.
So just looking at the political scene in the US right now, it's obviously a very volatile moment. We're speaking just a few days after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I just wondered if you want to kind of like speak a bit about what the atmosphere in New York and the US
Yeah,
is like right now.
I think politicians on both sides of the aisle are very nervous. I think there are a lot of security concerns. America has a long history of assassinations. Now, the assassination seemed to fall out of vogue for a while and now seems to have returned. But you look at the 20th century, littered with presidential assassinations, high profile, of course, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Robert F. Kennedy, JFK's brother. So they're nervous. I mean, I think Democrats are nervous. Republicans, of course, since one of their own was targeted, are nervous. The Zoran campaign has increased its security. What they do now is very different than what I've seen prior campaigns do, which is they don't post a public schedule all that often, and then when they post that he's going to be somewhere, the reporter has to text or RSVP to get the location. Typically in a campaign, the night before, they'll send out a public schedule. It's like at 10 a.m. candidate will be here, 12 p.m. here, 2 p.m. here, and you know where to go. That has shifted. That had shifted pre-Charlie Kirk. I think they were concerned. That's why in my profile, I interviewed him in August. We talked about this because he's getting death threats. He is a target. So it's the mood is, as you said, volatile is a good word. I mean, it's not one where the right is winning or the left is winning. It's not one that is so easy to define. But
Mhm.
there's definitely a deep level of uncertainty right now in that, well, who's next? Like, who will be targeted? And that's why you see most Democrats are trying to, I think, bring the temperature down. Not talking about people online, posters on the left who are celebrating Kirk's death. That's a little bit different. The actual elected Democrats, whether it's Gavin Newsom, Joe Biden put out a statement. They're trying to bring it down. Trump, not really, because that's not what Trump does. We're going to get the radical left. He wants to use this as a pretext to crack down on the left. No one knows what that's going to look like exactly, though. If you know the history of America, there's a dark history of the CIA and FBI harassing left wing groups.
Mhm.
So the fear is that will come back. Now, will the Trump CIA and FBI be as organized as like the J. Edgar Hoover FBI, which really spent decades spying and infiltrating and running really dark operations against
Yeah.
activists? I don't know if we're going to go there, but that now is a concern. That's a real concern. Um, we don't know what's going to happen next. And yeah, I think for someone like Zoran, it is, you think about security a lot more. As mayor, you get a police detail, you get a lot, a lot of security. Now as a candidate, he has it too. He has a police detail. He has people following him. So I think it makes it harder to campaign, quite frankly. I think if you're talking just purely strategically, Zoran he's not doing the sort of street campaigning he did in the primary. He's not just out walking, you know, a block and going into businesses and standing out and meeting people. He's doing it, but not as frequently. So that's
Right.
been a shift. That's been happening even pre Charlie Kirk. So I expect the street campaigning to be curtailed now, especially, and that is different. My own fear as a media member is that going forward, politicians will use this as a pretext to really cut off access. That you're
Yeah.
going to see less. You're going to see more security theater, or I think sometimes it's not necessary, and politicians will use it as an excuse to duck the media. Zoran is not doing that. He does talk to the media, but I could see it in the future. Democrats and Republicans both saying, for security reasons, we're not going to appear in public much. We're not going to hold town halls. We're just going to interact with voters less. Of course, it's security, but you still have to talk to people. It's your job. You're a representative of the public. So my own worry is this. There's a new era that arrives, one where there's just much less public politician interaction, which I would not like.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like the antithesis of what Zoran has kind of built his movement and his campaign on. And I imagine also this political moment has posed some like rhetorical challenges for him because Mamdani's always been about unity and talks about bringing New Yorkers together and we're seeing JD Vance and Trump being very divisive and Vance outright rejecting unity. So with that increasing, I guess, volatility, to bring that word
Yeah,
into
it's
again,
it's
it
it's not
just
good. It's not good. Zoran did have a unity message. A lot of Democrats did. Vance and Trump do not. That's just a fact. They view that now as a existential struggle in some ways against the left. Now, I think assassinations are quite complex, and most assassins, this one included, do not have neat left-right ideologies. And Democrats and Republicans both make this mistake. I remember Democrats would attribute school shootings or mass shootings to the right wing, and
mm,
it's not. You look at the history of assassinations and shootings in America. You look at what goes into it. These are usually alienated young men, so-called underground men in the Dostoevsky sense, who don't have very clear-cut views one could just throw on a chart and say, "Oh, he's center left. He's
yeah,
progressive left. He's right of center. Oh, he's a Nazi." I mean, what goes into making someone kill, and this is another conversation,
yeah,
is quite complicated. So it's very distressful for me just watching this, where the right now is taking this very simplistic view of, oh, it's like Democrats killed Charlie Kirk. I mean, no, it was a 22-year-old kid allegedly in Utah, a gun state, who seemed to have a very sort of, like many killers, seems to be very alienated, seem to spin off perhaps into some kind of mental illness, as a lot of young men are. If you are going to sort of be struck by mental illness, you are typically at that age. It's usually late teens, early 20s. And it's why you see a lot of mass shooters and killers in that real bracket of like
mm,
late teens to kind of mid 20s. So that's being exploited now. The Trump right is going to exploit it to crack down on civil liberties, to crack down on the left as much as they can. And it's going to be up to the left, up to the Democrats to combat that. I mean, that's going to be the next struggle.